Ladies and gentlemen, let's get honest. If you want to attract you women who are confident, emotionally intelligent, feminine yet powerful, then you need to become a man who commands respect before affection, presence before presence, and boundaries before validation. Too many men think attraction is about chasing, pleasing, and constantly being available. But you women, they are not attracted to convenience. When a man decides not to tolerate disrespect, even in its smallest, most socially acceptable forms, he immediately separates himself from the crowd. You see, disrespect doesn't always come in bold, obvious gestures. Often it hides in jokes disguised as teasing, in backhanded compliments in subtle eye rolls when you share your thoughts, or in the way someone consistently cuts you off mid-sentence. You man is finely attuned to these micro-signals. He doesn't ignore them. He doesn't laugh them off to keep the peace or maintain the vibe. He pays attention to the energy behind the words, the intention behind the action, and how it makes him feel. This type of man has done the inner work to recognize what respect looks like, and more importantly, what it feels like. He knows that when a woman crosses a line, even slightly, and he remains silent, he's essentially training her how to treat him. And that's not just about her, it's about how he sees himself. His self-respect isn't conditional on how beautiful she is, how much he likes her, or how long he's been single. He doesn't excuse toxic behavior because of loneliness or attraction. He addresses it calmly and clearly, even if it risks the connection, especially if it risks the connection, because he understands something most men don't. If your connection can't survive honesty, it isn't worth keeping. He knows that allowing subtle forms of disrespect to go unchecked is like allowing termites in your foundation. They may seem small at first, but left alone, they eat away at your integrity, your confidence, and your peace. And once your peace is disturbed, you become reactive, you become insecure, you start overthinking instead of leading, and that energy, you women can feel it. It repels them, not because they don't like you, but because it signals instability, internal conflict that hasn't been resolved. A man who doesn't tolerate disrespect also doesn't mirror it. He doesn't retaliate with sarcasm or passive aggression. He doesn't get even. He simply names what happened. He might say, "I don't find that kind of comment funny," or "I felt dismissed when you said that," and then he observes. He watches her response, not just her words, but her energy. Does she take accountability? Does she become defensive? Does she try to shift the blame back onto him? That response tells him everything he needs to know about whether this woman is emotionally mature enough to stay in his space. And yes, it requires confidence to do this. It requires a strong sense of identity, where your worth isn't determined by whether or not a woman likes you. Because truthfully, when you hold your boundaries, some people will walk away. That's okay. That's not a loss. It's a filter. It clears the room of anyone who is only there to test your limits, not respect them. And for every person who walks away, someone better aligned will step in, someone who wants to respect your boundaries because she has her own. This kind of man doesn't seek to dominate or control. He doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't argue for hours to prove a point. His strength is quiet but unshakable. He speaks once, and that's enough. He walks away not out of ego, but out of clarity. He's not emotionally available to relationships that ask him to lower his standards or betray his values. And because he shows up like this consistently, you women are drawn to him. They know they can trust him, not just to protect them, but to protect himself, which is even more attractive. They recognize that this is a man who won't allow mistreatment, a man who doesn't chase validation, a man who leads with emotional maturity, not people-pleasing. And when a you woman meets a man like that, her respect for him builds instantly. She may be beautiful, successful, and pursued by many, but she won't open up fully unless she feels emotionally safe. That safety isn't created by compliments or gifts. It's created by a man who honors himself in every interaction. No matter how subtle or casual it seems, this is what makes boundary setting so magnetic. It isn't about confrontation, it's about clarity. It says, this is who I am, this is what I allow, and if you want to be here, it must be with respect. That kind of energy doesn't beg, it doesn't chase, it doesn't fear loss. It simply holds the line, and the right woman will step across it willingly because she sees the value in the man who drew it. When a man refuses to drop his life for a woman he barely knows, he immediately communicates something powerful, that his time, energy, and presence are valuable. You see, it's easy to get swept up in the excitement of new attraction. Maybe she's beautiful, engaging, fun to be around, and for a moment everything else fades into the background. But the truth is, when you rearrange your entire world for someone you've just met, you're not just showing enthusiasm, you're showing imbalance. You're sending the message that her attention matters more than your routine, your goals, your priorities, and that's never attractive to a woman who's actually worth your time. Hive. Al, you women are not looking for men who bend over backward just to be liked. They don't want to be worshipped, they want to be understood, appreciated, and matched in energy. When a man cancels plans with friends, skips workouts, or ignores his passions just to be more available, it may feel like devotion, but what it really does is erode his sense of self. Suddenly, his identity becomes tied to how she responds to him. Every reply, every plan, every signal from her starts to dictate his day, his mood, his focus. That's not love, that's dependency. And nothing pushes away a secure, emotionally grounded woman faster than neediness, masked as attention, the man who maintains his routine, who doesn't immediately drop everything to reply within seconds, who says, I'd love to see you, let me check my schedule, is not being difficult, he's being intentional. He's showing her that he's already built a life he's proud of, a life that she is invited to witness, not replace, and that energy, it's intoxicating. It signals that he has structure. He knows what matters to him. He has discipline. He's not just waiting around for a woman to give his life meaning. He's already living with purpose, and her presence can enhance it, but not define it. When a woman sees that you are not easily swayed, that you can say no without guilt, that you don't rearrange your entire day for a last-minute meet-up just because she's suddenly available, it tells her that she must respect your time, that she must earn access to your energy in the same way you would expect to earn access to hers. This doesn't mean being cold or dismissive. It means being rooted, grounded, confident in the fact that your path doesn't pause every time someone new enters your orbit. This kind of boundary also protects you from overinvesting emotionally too soon. When you stay centered in your routine, you give yourself the space to observe rather than chase. You notice how she handles plans, how she responds to your pace, whether she respects the structure you've created around your life. And in that clarity, you begin to see whether she's aligned with you or simply exciting in the moment. You start to date from a place of self-awareness instead of emotional urgency. And that's where true discernment lives. The man who doesn't drop everything also avoids the pitfall of self-abandonment. Too often, men lose themselves in pursuit. They stop going to the gym. They stop checking in with their mentors. They delay projects, skip routines, all under the illusion that if they just show enough devotion, she'll choose them. But the truth is, she's not choosing the man he's becoming. She's watching the man he used to be disappear. And when a woman senses that a man is becoming a shell of himself just to please her, she begins to pull back. Not out of cruelty, but out of discomfort. Because something inauthentic is happening, and it doesn't feel safe. But when you stay consistent with your goals, when you communicate with presence but not pressure, when you make time without losing yourself in the process, you create space for genuine connection to grow. A connection based not on urgency, but on mutual interest, on real attraction, on the steady unfolding of two whole individuals getting to know each other without sacrificing who they are in the process. That's when the dynamic becomes powerful. That's when she leans in, not because you chased, but because you stood firm, because you were already full before she arrived. And that fullness is what makes her stay. Protecting your emotional peace isn't just a boundary. It's a way of life that silently tells the world how serious you are about your well-being. When a man decides to guard his emotional space, he isn't doing it to be cold, unfeeling, or distant. He's doing it because he understands that his energy is sacred, and not everyone should have access to it. Emotional peace is that quiet space inside where clarity lives, where decisions are made with intention rather than impulse, and where self-respect becomes louder than chaos. It's not something you beg for. It's something you build and maintain by refusing to let drama or toxicity rent space in your life. The truth is, emotional chaos is addictive. The high of intensity, the roller coaster of excitement followed by confusion, can feel like passion, but it's not. It's instability in disguise. And when a man hasn't done the work to center himself emotionally, he'll confuse a woman's erratic behavior with chemistry. He'll see mixed signals as a challenge to win her over, not as a warning sign to step back. But a man who protects his peace doesn't engage in emotional tug-of-wars. He doesn't chase clarity in unclear spaces. He doesn't try to fix what isn't his to fix. He simply removes himself. You see, not every woman who enters your life is meant to stay. Some are sent to test your center. They'll bring emotional highs that feel intoxicating, but beneath the surface, they drain you. They'll provoke reactions, push your buttons, play hot and cold just to see if they can shake you. And if you're not grounded, you'll find yourself playing along, trying to prove your worth, trying to win over someone who thrives on emotional confusion. But the man who guards his peace knows how to identify this pattern early, and instead of trying to calm the storm, he becomes the stillness that the storm can't touch. This kind of emotional discipline isn't loud. It's not dramatic. It doesn't need to announce itself. It's felt. It's seen in the way a man responds to pressure, in how he navigates disappointment, in how he doesn't beg for closure or obsess over delayed replies. It's in how he can express his feelings with clarity, but never lets someone else's behavior define his worth. His peace becomes his superpower, and for you women, that kind of emotional regulation is irresistible. Because in a world full of men who react, complain, or lose themselves when things get emotionally complicated, a man who remains calm, composed, and centered stands out like a lighthouse in a storm. Protecting your emotional peace also means setting limits on emotional labor. It's not your job to heal her past, solve her inner conflicts, or be her emotional punching bag when she's overwhelmed. You can be empathetic without absorbing someone else's trauma. You can be present without being consumed. And when you draw that line, you're not rejecting her. You're choosing yourself. You're saying, I'm here, but I won't sacrifice my mental well-being for a connection that asks me to abandon myself. That's not selfish. That's healthy. That's mature. And maturity is magnetic. It also means learning how to say no without guilt. It means choosing solitude over forced connections. It means understanding the difference between peace and loneliness, and recognizing that quiet moments are not empty. They're full of wisdom, growth, and alignment. A man who's at peace doesn't need distractions to feel complete. He doesn't need constant validation to feel alive. He has built a sanctuary within himself, and only those who add to it are allowed entry. And when you become that man, the man who protects his emotional state, who doesn't get pulled into unnecessary conflict, who chooses inner calm over external approval, you don't chase you women. You attract them because they can feel that you don't need them to feel whole. You want them, yes, you're open, yes, but your peace comes first. And that priority is what pulls in a woman who values not just your presence, But your peace too, when a man chooses not to chase closure. He's not being emotionally detached or cold-hearted. He's stepping into a place of self-respect that most people never reach. Because chasing closure is often a disguised attempt to seek validation. It's that need to hear the other person say, "You mattered, you were enough, you didn't mess it up." But the truth is, Al, you men don't outsource their healing to the very people who hurt them. They don't need someone else's explanation to find peace. They give themselves the closure they were hoping to receive from someone else when a woman ghosts, flakes, loses interest, or suddenly becomes emotionally unavailable. It can feel confusing and even painful. It's natural to want to understand what happened, what changed, why the connection faded. But the man who is deeply rooted in his self-worth knows that begging for clarity from someone who couldn't even offer honesty isn't strength. It's emotional dependency. And dependency, disguised as just wanting to talk things out, leads to repeated disappointment, because the person you're seeking closure from has already shown you who they are through their behavior. That was the closure. It's a quiet kind of power when a man walks away from confusion and chooses clarity without needing confirmation. He doesn't reread old messages. He doesn't try to interpret silence. He doesn't go back to see if her social media gives him a clue. He simply accepts the truth in front of him. When someone truly values you, you won't have to guess. You won't have to beg. You won't have to chase down answers to questions that wouldn't exist in a healthy connection in the first place. And this boundary, this refusal to chase closure, does something transformative. It shifts your energy from victimhood to leadership. Instead of focusing on what you lost, you begin focusing on what you allow moving forward. You become the man who doesn't argue with emotional inconsistency. You become the man who doesn't reward avoidance with access. You become the man who doesn't keep knocking on a door that someone has clearly shut. This doesn't mean you don't feel. It doesn't mean you don't care. But you allow the pain to move through you without creating unnecessary narratives to soothe your ego. You trust that if something ends, it's either a lesson or a redirection, and sometimes both. You know that no amount of begging or bargaining will change someone's emotional capacity, and you're no longer willing to shrink just to make someone else more comfortable. A man who doesn't chase closure starts operating on a higher level of emotional intelligence. He sees silence as a message. He sees avoidance as a decision. He knows that inconsistent energy is a clear sign of where he stands, and he doesn't take it personally. He takes it as information. He moves forward with grace, not bitterness, with strength, not resentment, and that movement, grounded, steady, and unapologetic, is what makes him magnetic to women who are also emotionally mature. When you stop chasing closure, you reclaim your dignity. You stop needing a perfectly wrapped explanation to validate your experience. You stop asking for answers from people who couldn't even give you consistency. Instead, you look at what happened, acknowledge the impact, feel what you need to feel, and then rise. You rise into a version of yourself that isn't tied to someone else's willingness to be honest. You rise into emotional independence. You rise into your power, and here's the most powerful truth. Val, you women are deeply drawn to men who don't linger in confusion. A man who knows how to walk away without drama. A man who lets go with quiet confidence. A man who doesn't allow unanswered questions to define his worth. That man signals emotional strength. That man becomes rare. And in a world where most people are still begging for explanations, he becomes unforgettable when a man refuses to overinvest in someone who is underinvested in him. He immediately reclaims his emotional power and sets a powerful standard for how he expects to be treated. This isn't about playing games or being emotionally cold. It's about balance. Relationships at any stage should reflect mutual interest and energy. If you're always the one initiating conversations, making plans, checking in, or showing enthusiasm, while the other person barely matches your effort, you are not in a relationship. You are in a performance. And the man who constantly performs for love, ends up losing himself trying to earn what should be naturally reciprocated. Overinvesting often starts subtly. You meet someone, you feel a spark, and suddenly you find yourself going out of your way to impress her, to be available, to please, to prove that you're different. But here's what happens. Your value in her eyes doesn't increase because you're trying harder. In fact, it often decreases because people don't value what is handed to them on a silver platter without effort. Hey Val, you women, in particular, are attuned to energy. They can sense when a man is giving too much too soon, not because he's generous, but because he's afraid of losing her before she's even chosen him. The man who doesn't overinvest early on is not withholding love, he's protecting his energy. He's pacing himself, he's observing, not assuming. He doesn't assign potential to someone who isn't showing consistent behavior. He gives as much as he receives. He lets her reveal her character over time before offering deep emotional access. This type of man doesn't rush into commitment based on chemistry alone. He values connection, but not at the cost of self-abandonment, and let's be honest, emotional overinvestment often leads to emotional imbalance. You start getting anxious when she takes too long to reply. You begin to question your worth when she doesn't seem excited. You second guess everything you said, wondering if you came on too strong. That anxiety isn't love, it's a response to giving more than you're receiving. It's your intuition trying to alert you that your energy is not being honored, and instead of listening, too many men double down. They try harder, send longer messages, plan bigger dates, offer more support, all in the hope that if they just do enough, she'll see their value. But value doesn't need to be proven. It needs to be recognized. Val, your man understands this deeply. He's not afraid to pull back if he notices an imbalance. He's not afraid to slow things down when he feels he's carrying the emotional weight of the connection. He's not playing hard to get. He's being true to himself. He knows that if he has to constantly chase, persuade, or convince someone to engage, he's not in something healthy. He's in something fragile. And fragile things break under pressure. This boundary becomes even more important when you realize that consistent one-sided effort creates resentment. You begin to feel drained, frustrated, and even bitter. You lose your natural confidence. You stop feeling appreciated. You give more, but feel less fulfilled. And slowly, you start to shrink. You stop being the grounded, powerful version of yourself and become a man operating from fear. Fear of rejection, fear of not being enough, fear of starting over. That's not love. That's emotional depletion. But when a man holds this boundary, when he chooses to give only where he sees genuine effort being returned, he keeps his emotional integrity intact. He remains whole. He remains powerful. He becomes the kind of man a hive, Val, you woman is drawn to because she feels the strength in his restraint. She sees the calm in his presence. She knows that if she's not bringing equal energy, he won't be sticking around just because she's beautiful, charming, or convenient. And that standard is what commands respect. When you stop overinvesting in those who are underinvested in you, you start attracting women who want to meet you fully, women who are emotionally available, women who don't take your effort for granted. Because the energy you protect becomes the energy others must match if they want to be close to you. When a man sets the tone for communication, he automatically positions himself as emotionally intelligent, grounded, and intentional, not just in words but in presence. Most people communicate reactively, waiting for someone else to define the energy of the conversation. But Val, you man initiates with clarity and consistency. He doesn't rely on games, delayed replies, or cryptic messages to appear interesting. He uses direct language, honest expression, and calm composure to create an emotional environment where safety, respect, and authenticity can flourish. And the moment Val, you woman, senses that, she feels a kind of ease that makes her lean in instead of pull away. The man who sets the tone for communication doesn't just respond when it's convenient. He's intentional about what he says and how he says it. If he's interested, he communicates interest. If he needs space, he expresses it without guilt. If something feels off, he speaks up without aggression. He does not communicate to control, he communicates to connect, and that subtle difference is what separates him from the men who play games or hide behind aloofness, because real attraction isn't built on confusion. It's built on clarity, and clarity comes from emotional leadership. Too many men think withholding attention, being vague, or constantly shifting their tone will keep her intrigued. But what it actually does is create instability. Hi, Val. You women don't want to guess where they stand. They don't want to decode emotional signals like puzzles. They want to feel safe enough to open up, and that safety begins with your consistency. When a man speaks with intention and shows that his words align with his actions, he becomes trustworthy, not in a performative, overpromising way, but in a deeply present way that shows he's not just there for the highs, but grounded enough to navigate the uncomfortable moments too. Setting the tone also means drawing boundaries around the kind of communication you will and will not entertain. If a woman is inconsistent, sending late night texts, giving you attention only when she's bored, or offering vague replies that lead nowhere, you don't mirror that behavior. You don't match her inconsistency. You elevate the standard by responding only to what aligns with your emotional needs. That may mean ignoring a message that violates your boundary or responding with, "I appreciate your message, but I prefer communication that's more direct and respectful of my time." That's not rude. That's self-respect, and women who value themselves will recognize and respond to that same energy in you. This kind of man also knows when not to speak. Silence can be powerful when used with intention. He doesn't chase after clarity in the form of long-winded arguments. He doesn't try to fix every misunderstanding instantly. He knows when to pause, reflect, and return with emotional clarity. That pause speaks volumes. It shows he's not reactive. He's not emotionally triggered. He's choosing his words because he understands their weight. And in doing so, he creates space for more conscious communication to unfold when you become the man who sets the tone. You don't wait for her to decide whether the connection matters. You decide whether it aligns with the kind of emotional energy you want to build. You don't chase for attention. You observe how she communicates, how she responds, how she engages when things aren't ideal. And based on that, you decide whether to continue investing or walk away with grace. Because your standard is clear, and any woman who wants to be part of your world must rise to meet it. Not expect you to drop to a level of communication that leaves you drained, confused, or unfulfilled. Women are naturally drawn to emotional clarity. They are pulled toward men who express, not impress, who lead with calm, not control, who respond with grounded strength instead of scattered neediness. And when you consistently hold this tone, when you make it clear that communication in your life is intentional, mature, and reciprocal, you filter out chaos and attract depth. You no longer have to prove yourself or persuade someone to stay. You simply create the kind of emotional environment that you women want to be part of, and that kind of environment doesn't require force or performance. It only requires that you remain true to your standard and unwavering in your emotional tone. So, hear this clearly. Boundaries are not walls, they're gates. They don't push people away. They filter out the wrong ones and make space for the right ones to enter. When you set these 6 boundaries, you begin to operate on a higher frequency. A frequency where games stop, clarity reigns, and only emotionally mature women can step forward. And those women, they don't want to tame you. They want to meet you fully, deeply, authentically. So become the man who knows his worth and never begs for what he deserves. That's how high value attraction works, and that is power.